Couple disappeared sailing around the world. Decades later, a message in a bottle washes ashore. Before we get started, please write. Where are you watching this video from? The sun dipped low over the marina, casting golden streaks across the still waters. A soft breeze carried the scent of salt and distant journeys. The docks were alive with laughter, music, and the clinking of glasses, but beneath the surface, there was a quiet tension, the kind that always comes with goodbyes. Tom and Emma stood at the center of it all, arms wrapped around each other, surrounded by friends and family. The farewell party had been their idea, one last night before they set off on their greatest adventure yet, a round-the-world sailing trip aboard their beloved sailboat, Sea Whisper. She wasn't the biggest vessel in the marina, but she was theirs, refurbished with care, painted a soft white with navy trim and filled with dreams. Tom, tall with sun-bleached hair and an easy smile, moved effortlessly between guests, making toasts and cracking jokes. But his eyes always returned to Emma. She was the quieter of the two, thoughtful, with an old soul and a curiosity that never seemed to rest. That night, her laughter rang through the air, but every now and then she paused, eyes lingering on the horizon. A close friend raised a glass. "To Tom and Emma," he said, voice cracking slightly. "To chasing horizons, to love, and to coming home safe." There was applause, but also a moment of silence that hung in the air just a second too long. Later, as the party began to wind down and the last sliver of sun vanished into the sea, Tom and Emma slipped away from the crowd. They walked down the dock hand in hand, past rows of moored boats, their footsteps echoing softly in the night air. They stopped at the edge of the dock, where Sea Whisper waited patiently. Tom looked out over the water. "Can you believe it?" he said. "Tomorrow we leave everything behind." Emma nodded slowly. "I've wanted this my whole life. But part of me feels like something's watching. Like we're being pulled into something bigger than we understand." Tom chuckled gently. "You and your instincts." She smiled but didn't laugh. "They've never been wrong before." The wind shifted, sudden and cool, ruffling her hair. Tom wrapped an arm around her shoulders, grounding her. For a long moment they stood in silence, listening to the creak of the dock and the distant sound of waves slapping against wood. Finally she whispered, "Promise me we'll be okay." Tom looked at her, serious now. "I promise. No matter what happens." That night, the stars above the marina seemed impossibly bright, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. By morning Tom and Emma would set sail. No one knew it then, but it would be the last time anyone on that dock would ever see them again. The morning air was cool and crisp as the first light spilled over the horizon, casting long shadows across the dock. Sea Whisper rocked gently in her berth, sails furled, lines taut, as if she too was holding her breath. The marina was quiet now, the echoes of last night's farewell reduced to scattered confetti and empty wine bottles, left like relics of a dream already fading. Tom and Emma moved in silence, their motions practiced, focused. Emma double-checked the solar panels and secured the galley. Tom ran through the engine startup sequence, fingers steady, voice low as he murmured to himself. There was no need for words between them now. Everything had led to this moment. By 8 o'clock, Sea Whisper glided out of the marina like a ghost slipping into another world. The early stretch was calm, familiar waters they had sailed many times before. Friends waved from shore, some still in robes and holding coffee mugs, others teary-eyed. But within the hour, land faded behind them, swallowed by mist. There was no going back. Their route was ambitious. Down the western coast of the Americas, across the South Pacific, through the islands of Polynesia, onward to the Indian Ocean, and eventually around the tip of Africa before crossing the Atlantic. A full circumnavigation. A voyage few dared to dream, let alone begin. The first few days passed in a kind of dreamlike blur. They laughed often, sang along to music on the small marine radio, and wrote long journal entries, Emma with pen and ink, Tom on an old laptop with salt-rusted keys. They cooked simple meals in the galley, watched the stars emerge like scattered diamonds across the night sky, and spoke about everything, their childhoods, fears, the meaning of freedom. But the sea, like time, never stays still for long. On the 5th day the wind shifted. Clouds thickened. Waves began to rise. It wasn't a storm, not yet, but it was enough to remind them of their vulnerability. Sea Whisper creaked under strain. A line snapped unexpectedly, and Emma's hands blistered trying to recover it. That night, they sat together in silence, listening to the growl of wind against the sails, both pretending they weren't nervous. By the seventh day they were completely out of sight of any land. Water in every direction. The sky above, vast and empty. It was beautiful, yes, but it was also immense. Indifferent. And in that immensity, a sense of isolation began to creep in. Do you ever feel like we've slipped out of the world? Emma asked one night, her voice quiet as she looked out into the Black Sea. Tom nodded. Like we've entered a place where time doesn't work the same. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. They were alone now. Just the two of them, the boat and the ocean. But something else was out there too, silent, patient, watching. And soon they would begin to feel it. It had been nearly 3 weeks since Tom and Emma left the safety of the mainland. They had weathered rough seas and sunburned days, but their spirits remained high. Now, Sea Whisper sat anchored just off the coast of a quiet harbor in a small Latin American village. A remote fishing town not marked on most maps, surrounded by lush hills and veiled in a constant haze of sea mist. They had come ashore to stock up on fresh produce, water, and fuel. The town was quiet, almost too quiet. Children played barefoot in dusty alleyways, and elders watched from shaded porches with unreadable expressions. There was kindness in the air but also caution. It was Emma who noticed the man first. He stood near the fuel dock, tall, lean, and weathered by the sun. His clothes were oddly out of place, a long-sleeved jacket despite the heat, a dark cap pulled low over his brow. He didn't speak to anyone, didn't smile, and didn't look away when their eyes met. Just watched. Emma nudged Tom. That guy's been staring since we tied up. Tom glanced over casually. Probably just curious. Not many tourists come through here. Emma wasn't convinced. As they walked to the market, she felt his gaze trailing them, heavy and unblinking. Later that evening, as they returned to Sea Whisper, Tom noticed something unsettling. One of their lines had been loosened, not by the tide or the wind. Someone had tampered with it. Nothing was missing, but the intention was clear. Someone had come aboard. Emma's unease deepened. That night, she wrote about the man in her journal. There's something strange about him. He doesn't belong here, not like the others. His eyes, they didn't move like a local's. They moved like someone watching from the outside. We need to be careful. They discussed it in hushed voices over dinner. Tom was skeptical, trying to stay rational, but even he couldn't explain the loosened line. They double-checked every hatch and lock before bed. The moon rose late and heavy, casting silvery light across the deck. In the distance, a shadow moved along the shoreline, just for a second, and then it was gone. By morning the man had disappeared. Locals claimed they hadn't seen him before and didn't know who he was. A few even grew nervous when asked, offering vague shrugs and muttered replies in Spanish. Tom and Emma left the harbor that afternoon. The sky was clear, the sea calm, but a shadow now clung to the edges of their minds. The kind of shadow that doesn't need proof to feel real. And Emma's last entry before leaving the village read simply, "I don't think this is the last time we'll see him." Somewhere behind them in that quiet harbor, a set of footprints remained on the dock, slowly fading in the sun. It started with silence. 3 weeks after Tom and Emma left the quiet harbor in Latin America, their regular updates, once like clockwork, suddenly stopped. No emails. No satellite pings. No check-ins. At first no one panicked. Sailing across the open Pacific often meant days without contact. Spotty signals, broken equipment, unpredictable conditions, it was all part of the life they'd chosen. Their families had expected it. For a time. But then a week turned into 2. Then 3. Tom's brother, Michael, was the first to voice concern. He'd received a final message from Tom nearly a month ago, a short email mentioning favorable winds and how Emma had spotted whales off the starboard side. Nothing unusual. Nothing alarming. Just the last echo of a normal day at sea. Emma's mother Diane couldn't ignore the growing unease in her gut. She had always trusted her daughter's instincts, and now her own were screaming. She began calling authorities, filing inquiries with coast guards, harbor masters, and international sailing forums. What she learned chilled her. The last recorded signal from Sea Whisper's emergency transponder placed them roughly 400 nautical miles southwest of the Galapagos, deep in a desolate stretch of the Pacific, far from commercial lanes and rarely visited by other sailors. After that, nothing. Search efforts began slowly. The area was vast, the ocean unforgiving. Aircraft were dispatched to scan the grid where the signal was last recorded. Ships were rerouted. Other private vessels were alerted. But the Pacific gives nothing back easily. Weeks passed. No debris. No life raft. No distress beacon. Not even a floating scrap of wood. Whispers began to swirl. Maybe they hit a reef. Maybe the boat went down fast. Could have been pirates. Or a rogue wave. But some remembered the strange man in the harbor. The one Emma had written about. The one no one could identify. The one who had vanished without explanation. Among Emma's belongings, sent home months later in a weathered crate of personal effects recovered from a port they had visited before their disappearance, Diane found her daughter's journal. One entry stood out. The ocean is quiet, but it feels like it's watching us. Last night I dreamed of voices whispering through the hull. I woke up with the feeling that someone was on the boat, but Tom says it was just the wind. Diane read that page again and again. The official search continued for 42 days. On the 43rd it was called off. No evidence. No bodies. No wreckage. Just an absence so complete it felt like the ocean had swallowed not just two people, but every trace they had ever existed. The case was closed. Filed under, presumed lost at sea. But some questions can't be buried that easily. Some disappearances don't feel like accidents. And far beneath the surface something waited. The news broke slowly, first among sailing circles, then across local broadcasts, and finally onto the national stage. Sea Whisper, the sailboat carrying young couple Tom and Emma Weston, had vanished somewhere in the Pacific. Back home, the Westons and the Malloris, Emma's family, faced the glare of media attention. Reporters camped outside their homes. Headlines speculated on what could have gone wrong. Photos of Tom and Emma smiling aboard their boat were plastered across screens and newspapers with captions like, "Lost in Love and at Sea," and "Mystery in the Pacific." Theories began to spread. Some believed the couple had encountered a sudden storm, a squall large enough to capsize the boat in minutes. Others suggested mechanical failure or human error. But skeptics pointed out Sea Whisper was equipped with a top-tier emergency beacon, one that would have activated even underwater. Yet no such signal was ever received. Then came the darker suspicions. Piracy. Though rare, attacks in remote areas weren't unheard of. Some whispered about organized criminal networks operating off hidden islands. Others suggested the couple had docked in the wrong port, crossed the wrong person, maybe even the man Emma had written about in her journal. A popular sailing forum lit up with speculation. They were being followed. Look at her last entries. What if they were taken and the boat scuttled? Stranger things have happened in the ocean. But with no proof, every theory collapsed under the same crushing weight: absence. The most unnerving part wasn't what had been found, it was what hadn't. No wreckage. No emergency transmission. No life raft. Just an open ocean and two names slowly sinking into myth. Emma's mother still searched, tracking weather records, emailing sailors, clinging to her daughter's last words like lifelines. It feels like something's watching us. And somewhere, on a quiet beach thousands of miles away, a bottle had just begun to drift ashore, a silent messenger from a story far from over. 1 year. 12 long months had passed since Sea Whisper vanished into the endless blue. In that time oceans had shifted, seasons had turned, and headlines had moved on. But for the families of Tom and Emma, time had frozen, suspended somewhere between grief and uncertainty. The official letter came on a rainy Tuesday. It was sterile, emotionless, typed in government font and signed by an officer who had never met them. After an extensive international maritime search yielding no evidence of survivors or wreckage, the disappearance of Thomas Weston and Emma Mallory has been reclassified. Both are now presumed deceased. It was over. At least on paper. A small memorial service was held by the harbor where their journey had begun. Friends placed flowers on the water, watched them drift with the tide, and tried to speak through tears. A wooden bench was installed at the end of the dock, with a small brass plaque that read, "To Tom and Emma, may your spirits sail forever free." But the families were divided in how they mourned. Tom's parents, though shattered, eventually accepted the loss. They kept a framed photo of their son smiling on the deck of Sea Whisper beside a candle that burned each evening. He died doing what he loved, his father told a reporter once, voice trembling. If there's any comfort, it's that. Emma's mother Diane could not let go. To her, it didn't feel like death, it felt like something else. Something unfinished. The ocean had taken them, yes, but it hadn't returned a single piece in exchange. No sail fragment. No logbook. No body. And without those things, she refused to believe the story was over. She pored over every shred of information: wind patterns, satellite data, eyewitness accounts. She kept Emma's journals close, rereading her final entries until the pages were soft at the edges. That one line haunted her most. It feels like something is watching us. Diane emailed investigators monthly, asking for updates. Most went unanswered. She joined sailing groups online, even reaching out to captains and sailors traveling near the area where the signal was last recorded. A few responded with kindness. Others dismissed her as grieving, delusional, or both. Still, she kept searching. Late into the nights, Diane sat at her kitchen table with a map spread wide, tracking Sea Whisper's last known coordinates. A red pin marked the final signal. Around it, dozens of tiny notes: uncharted reef? Fishing boats nearby? Satellite blind zone? Her husband begged her to stop, but she couldn't. A mother knows, she whispered one night. I don't feel her spirit's gone. Not yet. And in some distant corner of the world, drifting unnoticed beneath the sun and the sea birds, a weathered green bottle bobbed quietly toward shore, its fragile contents waiting to be discovered. The world thought the story had ended, but the ocean was only holding its breath. Years passed. The world, as it always does, moved on. The headlines faded. The photos were taken down. New stories replaced the old ones, and the name Sea Whisper became just another mystery in maritime archives. But for those who had loved Tom and Emma, the loss never truly left. Tom's brother, Michael, returned to his work in architecture, though something about his designs changed. His buildings became softer, more open, full of light and windows facing the sky, as if he were always reaching for something just beyond the horizon. He rarely spoke about Tom, but he kept a photo of him on his desk, beside a tiny wooden carving of a sailboat that Tom had once made in high school. Emma's best friend Lily got married, moved to Oregon, and had a daughter. She named her Emmeline. Every year on the anniversary of the disappearance, she sent a card to Diane. No words, just a pressed blue wildflower inside. A quiet gesture. A reminder. But Diane never stopped listening. The world said Emma was gone. But Diane still felt her daughter in dreams, in winds, in small impossible things. Like the time her radio turned on by itself playing Emma's favorite song, or when a gull landed on her porch and refused to leave, staring at her with intelligent, human-like eyes. The pain dulled, yes, but it never healed. And she wasn't alone in that. Others still whispered about the case from time to time. A retired Coast Guard officer once admitted, off the record, that the file bothered him. Too clean, he had said. Like the ocean just erased them. Nature doesn't usually work that neatly. Sailors who had passed near the same region over the years spoke of odd feelings. Sudden fog, inexplicable compass swings, even voices on dead radio frequencies. No proof. Just stories. Still they lingered. Some evenings, Diane would sit by the ocean with a blanket and a thermos of tea, her eyes fixed on the horizon. She didn't cry anymore. Not often. Instead, she would speak aloud, softly, as if someone were listening. I hope you're warm. I hope you're safe. I hope you know I never gave up. Because a part of her still believed. And belief, in the absence of evidence, can be a powerful thing. One morning, nearly 10 years after the disappearance, a boy walking along a beach in New Zealand noticed something bobbing in the tide. A bottle, scratched, worn, with something curled inside. It was the kind of discovery that might mean nothing. Or everything. 10 years. That's how long it had been since Tom and Emma disappeared. A decade of silence, of unanswered questions and fading hopes. Most people had moved on. The case had long grown cold. But for a few the wound never truly closed. And then, on an overcast morning along the southern coast of New Zealand, the ocean whispered again. It was a boy who found it. Leo Thompson, just 10 years old, wandering the rocky shoreline near his grandparents' cottage. He loved the beach after storms, when the tide left behind strange treasures. Driftwood. Shells. Once, even a piece of an old fishing net tangled with sea glass. But that morning it was something different. Tucked between two rocks, half buried in wet sand and seaweed, Leo spotted the rounded top of a bottle. The glass was green and old, worn smooth by waves. A cork sat wedged in its neck, sealed with a crust of blackened wax. Something shifted inside when he picked it up. Paper. Leo ran home, bottle clutched tight in both hands, calling for his grandfather. Together, they sat at the kitchen table, carefully working to remove the fragile contents. The paper inside was yellowed, the ink faint. But as they unrolled it, a name emerged at the bottom in a graceful, slanted script. Emma Mallory. The note was dated June 3, 2015, just weeks after Emma and Tom had vanished. If anyone finds this, we are alive. Or at least we were. Something happened. We don't know where we are now. It's not on any map. Please don't stop looking. We didn't drown. We didn't crash. There's something else, something none of us could have prepared for. The ocean isn't what it seems. Emma. Leo's grandfather stared at the letter, eyes wide. He recognized the name. Everyone in New Zealand had heard of the American couple who vanished at sea all those years ago. It couldn't be real. But the writing matched Emma's preserved journal entries, which had been published online by her mother years before. The letter's condition, later examined by specialists, showed genuine signs of long-term saltwater exposure, consistent with having drifted across the Pacific for years. News spread fast. Reporters descended on the village. Scientists and skeptics weighed in. Some claimed it was a hoax. Others insisted it was real, the first and only clue to a decade-long mystery. Emma's mother, Diane, now well into her 60s, was still alive. When investigators brought her a scanned copy of the letter, she held it with trembling fingers. Her voice cracked, but her eyes remained sharp. "She's still out there," she said. "I can feel it." A decade of silence had just been broken by a message carried on waves. And for the first time in 10 years, the world was listening again. The ocean had spoken, and it wasn't finished yet. The bottle had caused a media storm, but it was the note inside that truly ignited the world's attention. The message wasn't long, but it said enough to change everything. Here is the full transcribed text. If someone finds this, we are, or were, alive until very recently. Something is wrong here. We were forced off course. Our instruments failed. There was no storm, but the sky changed. The stars don't match any chart. I don't know where we are anymore, but we need help. There is land. Unmarked. Isolated. We've seen no other boats. No planes. Tom is injured. I'm doing what I can. We've rationed supplies. Please, don't stop searching. This isn't over. There is more here than I can explain in a letter. Strange sounds at night. Light from the trees. I don't know what's real anymore. If you find this, follow these coordinates. Please. We didn't drown. We didn't crash. We were taken by the ocean, but not in the way you think. Emma Mallory, June 3, 2015. The coordinates were real, pointing to a stretch of open sea west of South America, thousands of kilometers from any major shipping lanes. No islands appeared on maps of the area. It was classified as a dead zone, rarely traveled, rarely observed. But the mention of land, of strange lights and stars that didn't match known constellations, raised a wave of speculation. Was it a hallucination? A remote island with magnetic anomalies? A hoax crafted by someone with cruel precision? Diane, Emma's mother, didn't hesitate. She printed the coordinates, circled them with red ink, and placed the map on her kitchen wall. For her, there was no doubt. "She's alive," she said to a reporter. "And even if she's not, she was. Which means she survived the disappearance. Which means someone can still find her." The message was sent to maritime authorities. Some dismissed it as outdated. Others took it more seriously. A private expedition group based out of Chile announced plans to investigate the coordinates, funded in part by donations from people who had followed the story for years. Conspiracy forums lit up. Some users drew connections to other disappearances in the region. Others claimed knowledge of a hidden island, never officially recorded. There were whispers about magnetic fields, secret installations, even the supernatural. But one thing was certain. Emma had left behind a voice. A message that had crossed oceans and years to reach them. And in that single desperate note, the mystery was reborn. The message in the bottle swept across the world like a tidal wave. Within days of its discovery, news outlets from New York to Tokyo were running the story. A decade lost at sea, Emma's message found became a headline seen in every major newspaper. Talk shows debated it. Podcasts dissected every word. YouTube videos analyzed the handwriting, the ink, the coordinates, frame by frame. Was it real? That was the question on everyone's mind. For many it felt like a miracle. A voice from the past washing up on a remote shore. A woman thought to be long dead, reaching out, still asking for help. The romanticism of it clashed with the horror. What had really happened to Tom and Emma? Emma's note mentioned injuries, isolation, and something more disturbing, stars that didn't match known charts. Strange lights. Something watching them. It wasn't just a plea for help. It was a warning. The public split in two. Some believed it wholeheartedly. Experts confirmed the paper's age, the ink's authenticity, the erosion patterns on the bottle. Her handwriting was matched to old journals. The coordinates she listed were precise. Too precise to be random. Others cried hoax. Conspiracy theorists spun their own narratives. Some said the message was planted, part of a larger cover-up involving illegal testing or lost civilizations. One viral theory claimed Sea Whisper had stumbled upon an uncharted island being used for secret government experiments. Another suggested the couple had faked their deaths to escape society, and the note was bait to distract the world. Emma's mother, Diane, refused to entertain the noise. "I don't care about opinions. I care about my daughter. And I believe her. I always have." She became a central figure once more, fielding interviews, sharing Emma's letters and old photos. Her calm, unwavering faith in her daughter's survival moved many. Donations began pouring in to fund a search effort. Experts were pulled in from around the world. Oceanographers, linguists, cartographers, survivalists, even astrophysicists intrigued by Emma's mention of unfamiliar stars. Social media turned the case viral again. Hashtags like #FindEmma, #SeaWhisperMystery, and #MessageFromNowhere began trending globally. Artists recreated Emma's note in watercolor. Journalists retraced the couple's journey across maps, charting every stop, every detail. Some fans even set out in small boats to visit the coordinates, though most returned with nothing more than stories of endless water. The mystery had returned. But this time the world was paying closer attention. If the note was genuine, and all signs pointed to that conclusion, then someone had survived. At least for a while. Which meant they could be found. Or at the very least, their story could finally be finished. For the first time in 10 years, hope didn't feel foolish. It felt necessary. And as preparations for an official expedition quietly began behind the scenes, one question echoed across the globe. What really happened to Tom and Emma? With the world gripped once more by the mystery of Sea Whisper, pressure mounted on the authorities. For the first time in 10 years, the official investigation into Tom and Emma's disappearance was reopened. This time they had something they never had before: coordinates. The note Emma left behind had pointed to a precise location, a stretch of the Pacific Ocean few vessels had reason to visit. It was remote, far from trade routes, with no known islands in sight. But satellite images, when examined closely, revealed something curious. Small, fragmented landmasses. Blurred shapes. Possibly a hidden archipelago. Officials were cautious. They couldn't commit military or Coast Guard resources based on a message in a bottle, no matter how convincing. But others were willing to take the risk. A private expedition, part funded by international donations and backed by an independent maritime search foundation, assembled a team of specialists. Among them, retired naval officers, survival experts, cartographers, and even a former detective who had worked on the original disappearance case. Diane Mallory, Emma's mother, insisted on being involved, at least in planning. The journey began quietly. 2 boats set out from the Chilean coast under a veil of secrecy. They were equipped with satellite tracking, drones, and long-range communication systems. A third vessel, a support ship, would stay back at a safe distance. The ocean was calm as they approached the coordinates. But the closer they drew, the more the instruments began to fail. Compasses spun erratically. GPS signals dropped in and out. Even communication with the support vessel grew patchy. The team grew uneasy. This wasn't normal. After 2 days of slow, uncertain progress, The archipelago emerged through the fog. It wasn't marked on any charts, but it was real. A cluster of jagged tree-covered islets, surrounded by coral reefs and treacherous shallows. From the air, it looked untouched, wild and ancient, as if time had never touched it. No docks. No signs of civilization. Just dense jungle and volcanic stone. The expedition team couldn't dock with traditional means. The reef was too dangerous. They sent inflatable rafts and approached cautiously. What they found was unsettling. Signs of human presence. A half-rotted wooden post with a frayed strip of cloth tied around it. A rusted knife blade. Pieces of driftwood that looked deliberately arranged, perhaps a makeshift signal or shelter. No names. No bodies. But someone had been there. And recently. Even more chilling were the strange carvings found etched into rocks. Spiral patterns, unknown symbols, and something that looked like a crude map. It didn't match any modern language or known culture. Some of the team dismissed it as weathering. Others weren't so sure. A forensic team began to sweep the area, searching for DNA, belongings, any trace of Tom or Emma. Every leaf, every footprint was logged. The camp was discovered on the third day of searching. One of the search teams had ventured inland, tracing a narrow stream that cut through the undergrowth. The jungle was dense, humid, and difficult to navigate. But about a kilometer from the shore, in a natural clearing sheltered by overhanging trees, they found it, a small, overgrown campsite. It was basic but unmistakably human. A frame made from driftwood and bamboo had once supported a tarp, now torn and collapsed. Pieces of faded cloth, possibly from a sail, were still tied to branches. In the center of the site was a blackened fire pit, long cold. Around it, the remnants of survival, rusted cans, fishing line, and a cracked plastic water jug with algae growing inside. Nearby, under a flat rock, they discovered the most important find of all, a bundle wrapped in oilskin cloth, tied with what looked like shoelaces. Inside was a notebook, surprisingly well preserved. It was a journal, and the handwriting matched the samples the team had received in advance. It was Emma's. The early entries were careful and clear. She wrote about how their navigation equipment had failed in open water, how they were forced to rely on stars and instinct. Then, after a violent squall, they had lost their bearings entirely. Days later, with their food running low and Tom suffering a leg injury, they had drifted toward a small cluster of islands that did not appear on any of their maps. Emma documented their arrival. The shore was rocky but offered protection from the sea. They made a shelter, collected rainwater, and caught fish. Her tone was hopeful at first. Tom's leg is bad but not broken. Swollen. We're trying to stay positive. This place, it's not on any chart we have. We think we're west of South America, but it's impossible to be sure. The entries continued over the course of several months. She wrote about their daily struggles, collecting water, rationing food, tending to Tom's injury. Emma detailed their efforts to signal passing planes and boats, though none ever came close enough to spot them. There's nothing out here. Not even a contrail in the sky. I feel like we've dropped off the map. Later entries showed signs of exhaustion. Not panic, just the quiet erosion of hope. We've done everything we can. If this notebook survives, let it be proof. We didn't give up. We tried to survive. We waited for rescue. I don't know if anyone is still looking. The last dated entry was over 9 months after their last confirmed position. We're both thinner. Tom's leg never fully healed. I write to keep my mind clear. I don't know what else to do. There was no final goodbye. No dramatic ending. The journal simply stopped. But that was what made it so haunting. It was raw. Real. Human. The team handled it with care, documenting every item in the camp. Soil samples were taken, as well as possible DNA evidence from personal items. A waterlogged canvas bag contained faded photographs. One clearly showed Tom and Emma on their boat, smiling into the sun. Now, for the first time, authorities had proof. Tom and Emma had survived for a time on this island. But the question remained, what happened next? The journal didn't just confirm Emma and Tom had survived. It revealed what had gone terribly wrong. Back at the research vessel, forensic experts and investigators began carefully analyzing the notebook, scanning each page to preserve the fragile writing. Emma's voice came alive in the entries, her words painting a detailed account of the final chapter of their voyage. The first signs of trouble came weeks before they were presumed missing. Something's off with the engine. Tom thinks it's the fuel line, maybe salt corrosion. We're conserving power now, using the sails where we can. Still pushing west. Another entry. Rough night. Storm rolled in fast. We got caught in open water. Took on water and the radio's soaked. Not sure it's working anymore. Tom tried to fix it. We sent a signal, but no response. Then came the moment everything changed. Woke up to silence. Engine's dead. Masts damaged. The hull's okay, but we're drifting. Trying to stay calm. Rationing supplies. Hoping for wind. The entries showed their slow slide into survival mode. No panic, not yet. Just two people trying to stay in control, one day at a time. Eventually the tides pushed them toward land. Saw birds this morning. Then the outline of cliffs. An island, maybe more than one. No sign of boats. No names on the maps. Landed at a rocky shore. This is where we are now. Emma described the island's geography, their makeshift shelter, and the efforts to find fresh water and food. But the sense of isolation became sharper with each entry. No other vessels. No signs of life. Just us. Then a strange note. Something odd. Found a fire pit near the northern ridge. Too old to be recent. Stones laid out in a pattern. Someone's been here before us. Maybe long ago, but maybe not. She mentioned footprints, or what she thought were footprints, but they could never be certain. Wind and rain distorted the sand. Still, the idea settled heavily over them. We're not sure if we're alone. Could be imagination. Tom says I'm reading too much into it. Weeks passed. Their situation deteriorated. We tried to launch the lifeboat. Failed. It cracked on the rocks. No way off now. Waiting. Watching. Hoping. Emma's last entries were quieter. Sparse. Less focused on escape, more on documenting what they saw, felt, and feared. Sometimes we hear noises from across the water. Could be wildlife. Could be the sea playing tricks. But it makes us stay close to camp. The final page was undated. If this is ever found, please know we tried everything. We didn't sit still. We fought. We waited. We hoped. The entries ended there. No answers, just silence. And one final mystery. The island had been empty when the team arrived. So, where had Tom and Emma gone? And who, or what, left the other signs they had once found? At first, it seemed like Emma and Tom had been completely alone on the island. But as investigators reviewed more of Emma's journal and compared it with evidence found at the camp, another pattern began to emerge, subtle but undeniable. They weren't alone. In the later pages of the notebook, Emma had made several vague references to someone else. At the time, her words could have been interpreted as paranoia brought on by isolation. But now, with fresh eyes and forensic detail, they carried new weight. Found fishing lines that aren't ours. Handmade hooks, strange knots. Not recent but not old enough to rust through. Someone's been living here. He's watching us. I don't know how I know. I just do. Emma never described this person directly. She never gave him a name, only calling him the man, or the stranger. Her tone shifted, not panicked but cautious. There was no record of confrontation. No violence. But there was tension. He doesn't speak. Only looks. Keeps his distance. But he's always there. This detail was supported by a second discovery. A second, separate camp, deeper inland, well hidden among the trees. It was older than the couple's shelter, but not abandoned. The tools were primitive, handmade from metal scraps and driftwood. An improvised rain collector had been built from large plastic containers, likely salvaged from the sea. There were signs of a solitary existence. A worn hammock strung between trees, a small mirror tied to a branch, and rudimentary traps for catching small animals. Inside a stone-lined shelter nearby, they found dozens of empty tins, some dating back more than a decade. One was labeled in French. Then came the most revealing clue, an engraved military dog tag wedged between two rocks. The name was faded but partially legible. Marc Duval for Navy 1999. The search team sent the information to international authorities. Within days they received confirmation. Marc Duval had been reported missing at sea over 20 years ago. His boat had been lost during a solo voyage in the South Pacific. No body had ever been found. Had he ended up here? And if so, had he survived? One of the investigators, a former sailor, offered a theory. Duval might have lived alone here for years. A man like that, trained, resilient, he could have adapted. But isolation does something to a person. If he saw Tom and Emma arrive, maybe he saw them as a threat. Or, maybe as the only connection to a world he'd given up. Emma's journal hinted at that dynamic. She wrote of someone silently setting limits, taking tools when they wandered too far, leaving strange items near the camp and watching them from the trees. He won't let us leave. He doesn't speak. But somehow we understand each other. The idea was chilling. Tom and Emma may not have died from the storm, hunger, or despair, but from being kept deliberately on the island. By someone who didn't want them to go. It was Emma's final entries that delivered the hardest truths. The tone of the journal shifted again, no longer cautious but urgent. Something had changed. The balance between the couple and the unknown man, whoever he was, had broken. Tom wants to leave. Says he'd rather risk the ocean than stay here another day. I'm scared. But I think he's right. Investigators pieced together what likely happened from a combination of diary pages, the state of the camp, and the contents of the beach nearby. Emma's writing described how they began quietly preparing an escape, gathering anything that could float, planks from their damaged lifeboat, plastic containers, even fishing nets. They were building a raft. We've waited long enough. He's watching less now. Or maybe we've just gotten better at hiding things. Emma never wrote exactly what happened the night they attempted to flee. The next entry, scribbled and smudged, offered a single terrifying line. Tom is gone. What followed were fragmented reflections. Short, raw, written as if she had little time or strength to write. We tried. We launched at dusk. He went ahead, told me to wait for the tide. I saw him reach the current, but then I lost sight of the raft. There was no mention of violence. No blood. But Emma's next words carried an unbearable weight. I waited. All night. Nothing. He didn't come back. Search teams found no human remains on the island. No sign of where or how Tom may have died. The ocean, vast and unrelenting, keeps its secrets well. In her final entries, Emma seemed to accept the likelihood that she would not survive much longer. Food was scarce. Rain hadn't fallen in over a week. She was weak. Alone. And whoever the man on the island was, he had vanished, or perhaps had been watching from afar, unseen. And then came the very last page. If someone finds this, please believe me. We tried everything. I'm going to try one last thing. There's a bottle from the emergency kit. I'll write a second message. I'll seal it, wrap it, and hope the sea carries it farther than we ever could. If this bottle reaches the world, maybe someone will know what happened to us. Maybe someone will come. Tom, if you're still out there, I'm sorry. That was it. No signature. No date. Just those final words, quietly devastating, filled with love and loss. 10 years later, that bottle did wash ashore on a quiet beach in New Zealand. The paper inside was badly faded, but enough was legible to stir the world back into motion. Emma had survived Tom. For how long no one knew. But her message, her voice, had finally broken free of the island. And the mystery was no longer just about a disappearance. It had become a race to find the full truth before time erased the rest. As the investigation deepened, attention turned sharply to one figure, the nameless man Emma had described in her journal. The stranger. He. The silent presence who had watched, followed, and it now seemed controlled their fate on the island. The discovery of the French military dog tag had been the key. The name engraved into the corroded metal, Marc Duval, a sailor with the French Navy, had been missing since the late 1980s. At the time, his disappearance had been ruled accidental. His yacht had vanished somewhere in the South Pacific, and no trace had ever been found. Until now. Interpol reopened the file. Duval's naval record painted a picture of a competent, seasoned sailor. But it was his civilian life that raised alarms. After retiring from the Navy, he had worked as a private contractor in several coastal regions of West Africa and South America. Jobs with little oversight. In one instance, he had been detained briefly in Colombia in connection with smuggling charges, though he was released due to insufficient evidence. There were no convictions, but red flags marked his file like bruises beneath the surface. He was last officially seen in 1999, boarding his personal vessel from a harbor in Ecuador. He never returned. The storm he was believed to have encountered that year matched the area where Tom and Emma's GPS tracker had last pinged 3 decades later. Could it be coincidence? Experts didn't think so. With help from the French authorities, a DNA sample from Duval's niece, his closest living relative, was collected and cross-checked with material recovered from the second camp on the island. The result came back positive. Trace DNA found on personal items matched the Duval family line. The man who had lived alone on the island, the man Emma had feared, had almost certainly been marked Duval. But the questions only multiplied. Why had he remained there? Had he chosen isolation? Or had his boat truly been destroyed, forcing him into survival? More disturbing still, what was his role in Emma and Tom's fate? There was no journal from Duval. No confession, no explanation left behind. Just the traces of his long, solitary life. Tools shaped by hand. Traps meticulously built. Systems for collecting water, food, and even shelter, all suggesting someone with years of practice. Some believed he had lost touch with reality. Others theorized he had become territorial, viewing the couple not as guests or survivors, but as intruders. "He won't let us leave," Emma had written. That sentence haunted investigators. A forensic psychologist reviewed the journal and Duval's profile. His conclusion: this was not just about survival. This was control. He had created a world he ruled alone. And when that world was threatened, he did what he thought necessary to preserve it. Tom and Emma had become unwilling inhabitants of someone else's exile. And now, authorities had to confront a final question. If Duval had died, where was his body? And if he hadn't, could he still be alive? While the world obsessed over the identity of the mysterious island dweller, one person remained focused on something else entirely. A woman who had never given up, not for one moment, in over a decade. Margaret Linton, Emma's mother. When the news broke about the bottle, the journal, and the discovery on the island, Margaret had been in her modest home outside of Bristol, sitting by the same window where she used to watch for her daughter's letters. She had always believed Emma was still out there. Even when the officials called off the search. Even when friends gently told her to try and move on. Even when the rest of the world forgot. Margaret never stopped looking. For 10 years she'd quietly compiled her own archive. Weather logs, shipping data, satellite records, old interviews, and every scrap of correspondence Emma had ever sent. She had maps marked in red ink, books stacked to the ceiling, and folders full of handwritten notes. So when the official investigation released its findings, she read every word. And she saw something others missed. It was a small discrepancy, a minor detail most would overlook. But to Margaret, it stood out like a flare in the dark. A copy of a satellite image from April of the year Tom and Emma disappeared showed faint heat signatures on an island 30 nautical miles east of the one where the journal was discovered. Margaret had obtained the image years earlier through a friend in maritime search and rescue. Back then it was dismissed, the resolution too poor, the source unreliable. But now, with the new evidence, it took on chilling new relevance. She brought the image to the authorities. They were polite but skeptical. Still she pressed. If Emma and Tom landed on that island, how did the bottle reach the current? From where it was found, the tides make more sense if it came from the eastern side of the archipelago. That other island might have been their first stop, or where he first took them. Margaret didn't claim to have the answers. But she had questions. And more than anyone, she had motivation. She kept digging. Late one night, while comparing old Coast Guard audio logs to the official timeline, she noticed another inconsistency. A distress signal picked up 2 days later than previously recorded. The location wasn't an exact match, but it was in range. Why had that signal been marked as duplicate interference and never followed up? Margaret demanded the case files be reopened. Eventually, one of the private investigators, a former naval officer working independently, offered to help. He believed her. He too had begun to suspect that the original search had missed something critical. "I don't think the mystery ends with that journal," he said. "I think your daughter left more than just a message." With new attention, new coordinates, and Margaret's relentless determination, the investigation took another unexpected turn. Because if Emma had truly survived, there was still a chance, however small, that she had been found, or had left more behind. The renewed investigation, sparked by Margaret's findings and relentless pursuit, culminated in one final expedition, A mission not just to confirm the known, but to uncover what had been missed. This time the team was smaller. Discreet. A mix of private experts, independent journalists, and 2 officers from the International Missing Persons Unit. Their destination, the eastern island Margaret had flagged years earlier, long ignored due to poor imaging and outdated maps. The island was remote, overgrown, and untouched by modern footprints. Getting there required navigating shallow reefs and unpredictable currents, something only experienced sailors and locals could manage. But once they made landfall, everything changed. Within hours of exploration they found it, half buried in a dune near the southern beach, remnants of an older makeshift shelter. Tarps bleached white by the sun. Ropes frayed from salt and time. A rusted metal pot still half full of sand. Nearby, broken planks likely from the Sea Whisper, now indistinguishable from driftwood. But it was what lay deeper inland that confirmed their fears. Under a thicket of palm and brush, they found human remains, fragile, partially scattered but clearly not ancient. A corroded wedding ring with the initials T and E. A fragment of a shoe sole matching one Emma was seen wearing in early photos. And beside the bones, buried beneath a stone, a second journal, water-damaged but partially legible. This journal was shorter, less structured, its handwriting shakier. But it was Emma's. "This place is not the same. I think we were moved. Or maybe we tried to move ourselves. I can't remember anymore." The entries became fragmented, with longer gaps between them. Then silence. The forensic team confirmed that at least one set of remains likely belonged to a female in her 30s, matching Emma's age at the time of disappearance. But DNA testing was still underway. The second body, possibly Tom's, was never found in full. And still something didn't add up. A crude wooden cross had been placed upright near the shelter. It wasn't Emma's writing carved into it. And based on soil samples beneath it, the cross had been placed only a few years earlier, long after the couple vanished and well after the bottle had been released. Someone else had been here. The signs were subtle but real: a knife with a blade sharpened differently than those found earlier, the remains of a recently used fire pit, fishing lines strung between 2 trees still taut. Could Duval have survived even longer than they thought? Or had someone else come and left without a trace? The official conclusion was cautious. The expedition confirmed Emma likely died on the island, alone, after Tom's disappearance. But the timing and the presence of a third party left a trail of open questions. For Margaret, there was only one certainty: her daughter had fought to be found. In the weeks following the final expedition, the findings were compiled and released to the public in a detailed report. The conclusion, though thorough, left many unsatisfied. According to the official version, Tom and Emma's yacht had suffered critical damage in a tropical storm and drifted off course. Stranded in a remote part of the Pacific, they eventually reached land, one of the lesser-known islands of an uninhabited archipelago. There they encountered Mark Duval, a long-missing ex-naval officer who had himself been marooned years earlier. His mental state, according to psychologists, had likely deteriorated during his prolonged isolation. It was presumed that he exerted psychological control over the couple, preventing them from leaving and possibly contributing to their demise. Tom likely died first, possibly during an escape attempt. Emma survived longer, recording their ordeal in fragmented journal entries. Eventually she too died on the island. Her final act, the report stated, was likely the release of the bottle that carried her message across the ocean. Case closed. But not quite. The scientific analysis of the bottle raised questions. The note had been written on a piece of emergency ration packaging that did not match the type aboard the Sea Whisper, but rather a newer model, one produced 5 years after the couple vanished. Even more perplexing, the handwriting in the final note, while stylistically similar, showed slight inconsistencies when compared to Emma's original journal. Enough to doubt? Experts were split. Some believed Emma survived longer than anyone guessed, maybe even years after the presumed date of death, and that she continued trying to reach help. Others suggested an even darker theory, that someone else sent the bottle. Someone who had found her or her remains. Someone who had been on that island long after she was gone. But who? And why? No additional messages were found. No witnesses ever came forward. No conclusive evidence of Duval's death was recovered. The report ended with a single unresolved line. The question of who ultimately released the message in the bottle remains unanswered. In the months and years that followed, the story of Tom and Emma captured the public's imagination. What began as a tragedy became a symbol of human endurance, love, and mystery. A best-selling book titled Sea Whisper, The Lost Voyage brought their story to readers around the world. A major streaming service released a documentary featuring interviews with Margaret, searchers, and forensic experts, reenacting parts of the couple's final days. Tourists began visiting ports where their journey began. Sailors retraced their route. Young couples wrote Emma's name in journals before departing on voyages of their own. And on one quiet shore in New Zealand, a plaque was placed near the spot where the bottle was found. It reads, "To those who vanish and those who keep searching. Still theories live on. Some say Emma never died, that she was found by someone and chose a life of anonymity. Others believe Duval wasn't alone on the island. That something else, or someone else, was there hiding in the shadows of history."